In the quiet town of Millbrook, a former Marine's peaceful morning takes a dark turn when a group of motorcyclists targets his service dog. They didn't know that Shadow wasn't just any German shepherd. He was a decorated military canine with 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he never forgot his training to protect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The September sun painted long shadows across Main Street as James Sullivan navigated the familiar path to Cooper's Café, his trusted companion Shadow leading the way. The German shepherd's measured steps and alert posture reflected years of military training, though most passers-by saw only a service dog guiding a blind veteran. Few knew that both Shadow and James had served together in the Marines, their bond forged in the unforgiving terrain of Afghanistan before an IED explosion left James without his sight during their final mission together. The morning air carried the aroma of freshly baked pastries and coffee, mixing with the crisp autumn breeze that rustled through the maple trees lining the street. James had chosen this small town specifically for its quiet atmosphere after returning from his final tour 3 years ago. Here, among the familiar faces and routines, he had found a semblance of peace that eluded many veterans. Shadow, who had transitioned from military canine to service dog, remained his constant guardian, their shared experiences creating an understanding that went beyond handler and companion. The town of Millbrook itself seemed to embrace them both, offering the kind of close-knit community that understood the value of service and sacrifice. The local veterans support group had helped James settle in, finding him a ground-floor apartment near the town centre and assisting with Shadow's recertification as a service animal. The transition hadn't been easy. It never was for veterans, but the town's acceptance had made it possible. At precisely 7:30 a.m., as they did every morning, they claimed their usual table outside Cooper's Café. The wrought iron chair scraped softly against the concrete as James settled in, Shadow taking his position beside him with military precision. The morning regulars had grown accustomed to the pair, the tall, broad-shouldered veteran with his scarred face partially hidden behind dark glasses, and the imposing German shepherd whose alert eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. James's military bearing remained evident in his posture, a testament to his 8 years of service in the Marine Corps. Sarah, the morning shift waitress, approached with practiced ease. "The usual, James?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Her voice carried the warmth of someone who understood the importance of routine to her regular customers, particularly the veterans who found comfort in the predictability of civilian life. James nodded, offering a slight smile as Shadow's tail gave a single professional wag of recognition. The dog's training was evident in every movement, the way he acknowledged familiar faces while maintaining his protective stance, how he positioned himself to monitor both his handler and their surroundings. The cafe's outdoor seating area filled gradually with the morning crowd, local business owners, teachers from the nearby high school, and retirees catching up over coffee. James could identify most of them by their footsteps or voices, a skill honed by necessity after losing his sight. Shadow's steady breathing beside him provided a constant reminder that he wasn't alone, that his partner remained vigilant even in these peaceful moments. Their morning ritual had become a cornerstone of James's recovery, a way to stay connected to the community while maintaining the structure he needed. As Sarah returned with James's black coffee and a fresh bowl of water for Shadow, the German shepherd's ears suddenly pricked forward. His body tensed imperceptibly to anyone who didn't know him well, but James felt the slight shift through the harness. Years of working together had taught him to trust Shadow's instincts implicitly. The dog had saved his life multiple times. During their tours, detecting hidden IEDs and enemy combatants long before human senses could perceive the danger. That same instinct had seamlessly transferred to civilian life, helping James navigate both physical and social obstacles with dignity. The rumble of approaching motorcycles broke through the morning calm, growing louder as they neared the café. Shadow's muscles coiled slightly, his training kicking in as he assessed the potential threat. James reached down, running his fingers through the dog's thick fur, a gesture that looked casual to observers, but was actually a silent signal between them, acknowledging that Shadow's concern had been noticed. Their communication had evolved beyond words, built on a foundation of trust that only combat veterans truly understood. The morning that had started like any other was about to take an unexpected turn, though neither James nor Shadow could have predicted exactly how their peaceful routine would be shattered. The bond between a Marine and his K9 partner, forged in combat and strengthened through adversity, would soon be tested in ways they never expected on this quiet main street in small-town America. Their shared history, 2 tours in Afghanistan's most dangerous provinces, countless missions that had tested their resolve, and the final explosive moment that had changed their lives forever, had prepared them for whatever challenge approached. Their story, one of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable connection between a warrior and his 4-legged guardian, was about to remind everyone that appearances can be deceiving, and that the warrior spirit never truly fades, even in times of peace. The skills and instincts honed in combat might seem dormant, but they remained ready, waiting for the moment when they would be needed once again. The 3 motorcycles that pulled into the parking space adjacent to Cooper's Café were custom, Harley-Davidsons, their chrome finishes gleaming aggressively in the morning sun. The machine's modified exhaust shattered the peaceful atmosphere, causing several patrons to wince at the unnecessary volume. Shadow's body remained perfectly still, but his eyes tracked each rider with military precision as they dismounted their bikes. The leader of the group, a tall man who introduced himself loudly to anyone within earshot as Rex, wore a leather vest adorned with patches that spoke more of attempted intimidation than earned respect. His companions, shorter but similarly attired, flanked him like an honor guard as they surveyed the cafe's outdoor seating area. Their presence created an immediate shift in the morning's atmosphere, transforming the comfortable routine into something more uncertain. Sarah, the waitress, hesitated briefly before approaching their table, her usual warm smile slightly strained. The morning regulars had developed an unspoken choreography around James and Shadow's space, respecting the invisible boundary that allowed the veteran to maintain his comfort in public spaces. These newcomers, however, seemed oblivious to the delicate social ecosystem they had just disrupted. Rex's voice carried across the patio as he ordered coffee, his tone demanding attention rather than requesting service. His gaze swept across the other patrons before settling on Shadow, whose disciplined stillness seemed to catch his interest. James, sensing the subtle changes in the atmosphere through years of developed instinct, maintained his composed demeanor while his free hand rested near Shadow's harness. "That's quite a dog you've got there," Rex called out, his voice carrying a note of challenge that made several nearby patrons shift uncomfortably in their seats. The comment, though seemingly casual, contained an undercurrent of provocation that Shadow recognized immediately. The German shepherd's ears remained forward, his body language communicating readiness without aggression. James acknowledged the comment with a slight nod, his military training evident in his measured response. "He's a good companion," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect rather than demanding it. The contrast between his calm demeanor and Rex's forceful presence was striking. Rex's companions had spread out slightly, creating a triangle formation that any combat veteran would recognize as a tactical position. Whether conscious or not, their positioning raised Shadow's alertness to a new level. The dog's training from his military days began to surface more prominently. the way his eyes tracked multiple threats simultaneously, how his body shifted almost imperceptibly to optimize his protective stance. "Looks pretty serious for a guide dog," Rex continued, taking a step closer to their table. His boots scraped against the concrete, a sound that James catalogued precisely in his mental map of their surroundings. Shadow's muscles tensed slightly, under James's hand, communicating volumes about the situation's developing dynamics. The morning crowd had grown quieter, conversations dropping to whispers as the interaction drew more attention. Several of the regulars, including Tom Wilson, a retired police officer who frequented the Café, began watching the scene unfold with increasing concern. The social atmosphere had transformed from peaceful routine to anticipated confrontation. In the space of a few minutes, Rex took another step closer, ignoring the subtle warnings in Shadow's body language. "You train him yourself?" he asked, his tone suggesting more than casual curiosity. "He seems pretty intense for just leading someone around." The slight emphasis on "just" carried a dismissive note that caused Shadow's ears to flatten slightly, a warning sign that James recognized immediately. James's response remained measured, his words carefully chosen. "He came to me already trained," he explained, his hand steady on Shadow's harness. "We served together." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, but Rex seemed either unaware or deliberately ignorant of its significance. The tension continued to build as Rex's companions moved closer, their boots creating a symphony of subtle sounds that Shadow tracked with professional precision. The German Shepherd's training was evident in how he managed multiple potential threats while maintaining his protective position beside James. Years of combat experience had taught both handler and dog to read situations through multiple senses, a skill that was now proving valuable in an entirely unexpected context. Zara, watching from behind the counter, had already pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. The other patrons maintained their positions, but had shifted their attention fully to the developing scene. The morning sun continued, its climb over Main Street, casting shorter shadows across the cafe's patio as time stretched in the growing tension of the moment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rex's demeanor shifted as he processed James's words about military service, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before being replaced by a manufactured bravado. He glanced at his companions, who had maintained their triangular formation around James's table, then back at Shadow. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, but his attention hadn't wavered, a trait ingrained through countless training sessions and real-world operations in Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain. "Military, huh?" Rex's voice carried a note of challenge that made several nearby patrons tense visibly. "Wouldn't have guessed. Looks pretty domesticated now." The deliberate provocation in his tone suggested someone unaccustomed to being ignored or dismissed. He took another step closer, entering the invisible boundary that Shadow had been trained to protect. The dog's only response was a slight shift in position, barely noticeable to casual observers, but speaking volumes to those who understood military K-9 behavior. James maintained his composed demeanor, though his fingers had tightened imperceptibly on Shadow's harness. His military training had taught him to assess situations through sound and sensation, skills that had only sharpened since losing his sight. The position of Rex's companions, the subtle shuffle of their boots on concrete, the way their voices carried across the space, all of it painted a tactical picture in James's mind. Sarah had moved closer to the outdoor seating area. Coffee, pot still in hand but forgotten. Her free hand remained near her phone, ready to call for help if needed. The morning regulars had grown silent, their usual conversations replaced by an attentive hush. Tom Wilson, the retired police officer, had shifted his chair slightly, positioning himself for a better view of the situation while maintaining a casual appearance. "You know what I think?" Rex continued, his voice carrying across the now silent patio. "I think all this military dog stuff is just for show, probably just a regular mutt with a fancy harness." He reached into his pocket, the movement causing Shadow's ears to prick forward, though the dog maintained his disciplined stance. Rex pulled out a packet of cigarettes, the metallic click of his lighter echoing in the tense atmosphere. James's response was measured, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from years of commanding Marines. "I'd appreciate it if you'd step back, sir." Shadow takes his job seriously. The polite words carried an unmistakable warning, one that Rex chose to ignore as he blew smoke in their direction. The smoke drifted across their table, causing Shadow's nostrils to flare slightly. The dog's training had included scenarios with various environmental distractions, but Rex's deliberate provocations were testing the limits of his disciplined response. James could feel the tension in Shadow's body through the harness, reading the subtle signals that had saved their lives more than once during their tours of duty. One of Rex's companions, a shorter man with a patchy beard, laughed nervously. "Come on, Rex, let's get our coffee and go. Ain't worth the trouble." But Rex seemed invested now, his pride pushing him toward a confrontation that wiser minds would have avoided. He took another step closer, deliberately invading their space. "What's he gonna do about it?" Rex challenged, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. "Guide dogs are supposed to be friendly, right? That's what they train them for." His ignorance of military canine capabilities was evident in his dismissive tone, but there was something else beneath the surface, a need to prove something to his watching companions. Shadow's response to the escalating situation reflected years of specialized training. His body remained still, but his eyes tracked every movement with laser focus. Military canines were trained to assess threats while maintaining absolute discipline, a skill that set them apart from typical service animals. Every muscle in Shadow's body was ready to respond, but he waited for clear signals from James, their partnership built on absolute trust and precise communication. James's voice remained steady as he addressed Rex directly. "My dog has 2 tours in Afghanistan under his collar. He's not trained to be friendly. He's trained to protect. I'm asking you politely to step back." The statement hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone on the patio. Several patrons had begun gathering their belongings, sensing the situation was approaching a tipping point. Rex's companions exchanged glances, their earlier bravado diminishing as they processed James's words. The mention of Afghanistan had shifted the dynamic subtly, but Rex seemed determined to push the boundaries. He flicked his cigarette ash deliberately close to Shadow, the grey flakes drifting down near the dog's paws. 2 tours, huh? Looks pretty soft to me now. Probably forgot everything he learned over there. The tension had reached a critical point. Tom Wilson had set down his coffee cup and straightened in his chair, his law enforcement experience telling him this situation was about to escalate. Sarah had stepped back inside the cafe, phone now in hand, while other patrons watched with a mixture of concern and anticipation. The morning sun continued its climb, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the dramatic tableau unfolding on Cooper's Café's patio. The morning atmosphere at Cooper's Café had transformed entirely from its usual tranquil state. The tension that had been building reached a critical point as Rex made his next calculated move. With deliberate slowness, he extracted another cigarette from his packet, lit it with exaggerated care, and then, in a motion that appeared almost casual but carried clear intent, allowed the match to fall directly beside Shadow's water bowl. James detected the slight movement in the air, the soft sound of the match striking the concrete, and most importantly, the immediate shift in Shadow's muscle tension through the harness. The German Shepherd's training prevented any outward reaction, but James could feel the coiled energy in his companion's body. Their shared experiences in Afghanistan had taught them both to recognize the moment when a situation transitions from uncertain to dangerous. "You're making a mistake," James stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded Marine units through treacherous territories. "Shadow isn't just a service dog. He's a combat veteran, same as me." The words were delivered without emphasis or drama, but they carried the weight of shared battlefield experience. Several Café patrons who had served recognized the tone immediately. It was the voice of a commander giving one final warning before action became necessary. Rex's response demonstrated his failure to grasp the significance of the moment. He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the now silent patio. "Combat veteran looks more like a pampered pet to me." He turned to his companions, seeking validation. "What do you think, boys? Should we see what this warrior dog is really made of?" His companions, however, had begun to show signs of discomfort. The shorter one with the patchy beard shifted his weight anxiously, while the other took a small step backward. They had finally registered something in Shadow's demeanor that their leader had missed: the absolute stillness that preceded action, a trait familiar to anyone who had worked with military K9 units. Tom Wilson, the retired police officer, had quietly risen from his chair and moved closer to the scene. His law enforcement experience had taught him to recognize the signs of imminent confrontation. "Sir," he addressed Rex, his voice professional but firm, "I suggest you reconsider your next move. Military K9s are trained differently from regular service dogs." Rex dismissed the warning with a wave of his hand, his attention fixed on Shadow. The German Shepherd remained motionless, but his eyes never left Rex's face. Years of training in threat detection and response had honed Shadow's abilities to a razor's edge. Every muscle in his body was prepared for action, waiting only for the appropriate signal or a clear threat to his handler. Sarah had retreated inside the café, but remained visible through the window, her phone now pressed to her ear as she spoke in urgent whispers. Other patrons had created a loose circle around the scene, maintaining distance while unable to look away from the unfolding drama. The morning sun had climbed higher, eliminating the long shadows and illuminating the scene with unforgiving clarity. "You know what your problem is?" Rex directed his words at James, though his eyes remained fixed on Shadow. "You veterans come back thinking everyone should treat you special, parading around with your war stories and your fancy trained dogs." His voice carried a bitter edge that suggested personal grievances beyond the immediate situation. James remained still, his posture reflecting years of military discipline. His response was measured but direct. "Shadow and I didn't come here looking for special treatment or confrontation. We're here for our morning coffee, same as everyone else. The choice to escalate this situation is entirely yours." The weight of those words hung in the air as Rex processed them. For a moment, it seemed he might step back, might recognize the wisdom of de-escalation. Instead, he took another drag from his cigarette and, in a motion that crossed the final line, flicked the burning ash directly toward Shadow's face. The ash never reached its target. Shadow's training kicked in with lightning precision. A slight shift of his head was all it took to avoid the burning particles. The movement was so controlled, so professional, that it served as a clear demonstration of his military background. This wasn't the reaction of a standard service dog. This was the response of a trained combat veteran. The cafe patio had grown so quiet that the distant sound of traffic seemed unnaturally loud. Time appeared to slow as Rex processed Shadow's response, his face transitioning from smugness to uncertainty. He had expected, perhaps even hoped for, an aggressive reaction that would justify his behavior. Instead, he had received a demonstration, of professional restraint that made his own actions appear even more inappropriate. Tom Wilson's voice cut through the tension. "Last warning, friend. You're harassing a veteran and his service dog. Think very carefully about your next move." The statement carried the unmistakable authority of law enforcement experience, but Rex had already committed himself to his course of action. His pride, now visible on his reddening face, wouldn't allow him to back down. Rex's demeanor underwent a subtle transformation as he processed the mounting resistance to his behavior. The initial bravado that had fueled his actions began to mix with something else, a desperate need to maintain his perceived dominance over the situation. He took a calculated step to the side, positioning himself at an angle that military and law enforcement personnel would immediately recognize as a flanking maneuver, though his execution betrayed his civilian status. "You people think you're so special," Rex continued, his voice taking on an edge that caused his companions to exchange concerned glances, throwing around terms like combat veteran and military K9 like they mean something here in the real world. His statement carried the weight of personal grievance, suggesting deeper issues that had nothing to do with James or Shadow. James maintained his composed posture, though his military training had already catalogued the shifting tactical situation. The position of Rex's companions, the movement of café patrons, the subtle sounds of chairs being pushed back, all of it formed a clear picture in his mind. Shadow remained steadfast beside him, the German shepherd's body language communicating volumes to those who understood military K9 protocols. Tom Wilson, drawing from his law enforcement background, recognized the deteriorating situation. "The police have already been called," he stated firmly, his voice carrying the authority of his former position. "This is your last opportunity to walk away without consequences." The warning hung in the morning air, but Rex seemed beyond the point of rational consideration. Sarah had emerged from the cafe again, positioning herself near the entrance, where she could monitor the situation while maintaining a safe distance. Other patrons had created additional space around the confrontation, though none had left entirely, the scene holding them in place with a mixture of concern and morbid fascination. "Consequences?" Rex scoffed, his attention still fixed on Shadow. "What consequences? Your tough military dog hasn't done anything but sit there. Maybe all that combat training was just a waste of taxpayer money." He reached into his pocket again, the movement causing Shadow's ears to prick forward slightly. The only visible indication of the dog's heightened alertness. James's voice remained steady as he addressed Rex's mounting aggression. "Shadow's restraint isn't a sign of weakness. It's a demonstration of his training. He's been taught to assess threats and respond appropriately. Right now, he's giving you every opportunity to make the right choice." The statement was delivered with the calm authority of someone who had faced far more dangerous situations. The morning sun had risen higher, eliminating the last shadows from the cafe patio and illuminating the scene with unforgiving clarity. Rex's companions had begun to distance themselves subtly from their leader, recognizing the increasingly precarious nature of the situation. The shorter one with the patchy beard took another step back, while his taller counterpart seemed frozen in place, uncertainty evident in his stance. "Training? Let's test that training," Rex announced, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. He reached into his other pocket, extracting what appeared to be a small pocket knife. The metal caught the sunlight as he flipped it open, not pointing it at anyone, but making its presence known. The action caused an immediate reaction among the onlookers. Several gasps, the scraping of chairs being pushed further back, and a sharp intake of breath from Sarah. Shadow's response to the weapon was a masterclass in military K9 discipline. His body tensed imperceptibly, but he maintained his position, years of training evident in his controlled reaction. James, sensing the shift in his companion's demeanor and hearing the reactions of those around him, understood immediately that the situation had escalated to a new level of danger. "That's a federal offense," Tom Wilson's voice cut through the tension, all pretense of casualness gone. "Threatening a service animal, especially a former military canine, carries serious consequences. Put the knife away before you make this situation much worse for yourself." His hand had moved to his phone, though his eyes never left Rex's face. The introduction of the weapon had transformed the atmosphere entirely. What had begun as harassment had crossed a line into criminal behavior. Several patrons had their phones out now, recording the scene. Rex's companions had retreated further, their earlier bravado replaced by visible concern about the legal implications of their association with this escalating situation. Rex, however, seemed to have passed the point of rational thought. "Criminal behavior?" he sneered, gesturing with the knife in a way that caused Shadow's muscles to coil tighter. "I haven't done anything yet. Just showing your military mutt what a real threat looks like, since he seems to have forgotten." The statement carried both a challenge and a threat, though Rex's hand had begun to tremble slightly, betraying his own uncertainty about the situation he had created. The morning sunlight glinted off the blade in Rex's trembling hand, creating intermittent flashes that Shadow tracked with military precision. The German Shepherd's training in weapons detection and threat assessment had created neural pathways that never truly disappeared, even years after leaving active service. His body remained perfectly still, but his attention had shifted to a higher level of alert that James could feel through the harness. James's military experience had taught him that moments like these often balanced on a knife's edge between resolution and catastrophe. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of command presence that had guided Marines through complex operations. "You've crossed several lines now," he stated, his words measured and deliberate. "The weapon escalates this from harassment to a criminal act. Shadow is trained to respond to armed threats, and his response won't be what you're expecting." The café patio had transformed into an impromptu arena, with bystanders pressed against the building's walls, their phones recording every moment. Sarah had retreated inside again, speaking rapidly into her phone, while Tom Wilson had positioned himself strategically, his law enforcement training evident in his stance and positioning. The sound of distant sirens began to filter through the morning air, though they remained too far away to provide immediate intervention. Rex's companions had fully distanced themselves from the situation, moving toward their motorcycles with careful, measured steps. "Rex, man, this isn't worth it," the shorter one called out, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. "They're going to press charges now. Let's just go." The warning fell on deaf ears as Rex maintained his position, the knife still visible in his shaking hand. Press charges. Rex's laugh carried a hollow note that spoke of wounded pride and poor decisions. Over what? Teaching a fake tough guy and his oversized mutt some humility. He took another step to the side, attempting to circle around James's table. The movement, however, demonstrated his ignorance of military K9 tactical operations. Shadow adjusted his position with microscopic precision, maintaining optimal defensive coverage of his handler while tracking the potential threat. James remained seated, his posture relaxed but alert. Years of military service had taught him to recognize the signs of an imminent attack. The slight changes in breathing patterns, the subtle shifts in weight distribution, the almost imperceptible tremor in a voice trying to project confidence. Rex was displaying all these indicators, though his civilian background made his intentions more transparent than he likely realized. "Your dog's not so tough," Rex continued, his voice taking on a manic edge. "All that military training, and he just sits there like a statue. Maybe we should see what it takes to get a reaction." The statement carried dangerous intent, but his body language betrayed uncertainty. The knife in his hand wavered slightly, its position shifting between offensive and defensive angles, as if he couldn't quite commit to either. The morning air had grown thick with tension, the usual sounds of the café replaced by an unnatural silence, broken only by the increasingly loud approach of police sirens. Tom Wilson's voice cut through the quiet. "They're almost here. Don't make this worse for yourself." The warning carried professional authority, but Rex seemed beyond the reach of rational argument. Shadow's ears rotated slightly, tracking multiple inputs: the approaching sirens, the shuffle of Rex's boots on concrete, the nervous breathing of nearby patrons. His military training had created a heightened awareness that categorized and prioritized threats automatically. The knife remained the primary concern, its presence elevating the situation beyond standard threat parameters. James could sense the shifting dynamics through years of battlefield experience. The tension in Shadow's body, the positioning of bystanders, the subtle changes in ambient sound, all of it painted a tactical picture in his mind. "Shadow," he said quietly, the name carrying command, intent that only the dog would recognize. The German shepherd's muscles coiled imperceptibly tighter, ready to transition from passive defense to active response in a fraction of a second. Rex interpreted the quiet command as weakness, a mistake that demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of military K-9 operations. "What's that supposed to do?" he sneered, taking another step closer. "Give him a command. Let's see what your war dog can really do." The challenge carried a threat, but also an undercurrent of uncertainty that suggested he wasn't entirely committed to his chosen course of action. The sirens grew louder, their wailing now clearly distinguishable as multiple units approaching. Rapidly, the sound seemed to add pressure to the situation, pushing Rex toward a decision point. His companions had mounted their motorcycles, engines idling, as they waited to see their leader's next move. The morning sun had risen fully, eliminating all shadows from the café patio and illuminating the scene with unforgiving clarity. The mounting tension at Cooper's Café reached a critical point as several bystanders decided they could no longer remain passive observers. Eleanor Matthews, a retired schoolteacher who had watched the situation unfold from her regular corner table, stood up with deliberate slowness. Her movement drew Rex's attention momentarily away from James and Shadow, creating a subtle shift in the confrontation's dynamics. "Young man," Eleanor's voice carried the authority of 30 years in the classroom, "what you're doing isn't just illegal, it's shameful." Her words cut through the tension with remarkable clarity. "That dog and his handler served our country. They protected people like you and me while we sat safely at home, and this is how you repay their sacrifice." The rebuke carried additional weight, coming from someone who clearly represented the community's moral conscience. Rex's grip on the knife tightened momentarily, but uncertainty flickered across his face. Eleanor's intervention had transformed the situation from a personal confrontation into a public referendum on his behavior. Other patrons began to voice their agreement, creating a chorus of disapproval that seemed to destabilize Rex's already precarious confidence. James remained perfectly still, his military training evident in his composed demeanor. Shadow maintained his defensive position, but his ears rotated slightly to track the movement of the gathering crowd. The German shepherd's professional assessment of the situation now included multiple civilian participants, adding complexity to his tactical calculations. Thomas Chen, the owner of the hardware store across the street, had emerged from his shop. After noticing the commotion, his presence added another layer of community pressure to the situation. "I've watched James and Shadow come here every morning for 2 years, he called out, his voice carrying across the patio. "They've never caused trouble for anyone. You're the one creating problems in our neighborhood." The sirens grew louder, now only blocks away. Rex's companions revved their motorcycles impatiently, the sound competing with the approaching police vehicles. "Rex, they're almost here!" The shorter one shouted, his voice tight with anxiety. "We need to go now." The urgency in his tone reflected the growing reality of their situation. Sarah had emerged from the cafe again, this time accompanied by Marcus Cooper himself, the establishment's owner. Marcus, a Vietnam veteran, assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who understood combat scenarios. "The police are less than 2 minutes out," he announced clearly. "You have a choice to make, son, and you need to make it fast." Rex's position had become increasingly untenable. The knife in his hand seemed less a tool of intimidation and more a symbol of his poor decisions. Shadow tracked every subtle movement, his military training evident in how he maintained optimal defensive positioning while accounting for multiple variables in the environment. James spoke again, his voice carrying the steady authority that had once guided troops through complex operations. "You've got a closing window for de-escalation," he stated matter-of-factly. "Shadow is trained to respond to armed threats with precisely measured force. Once he engages, the situation will be out of your control." The warning carried no hint of threat, merely a professional assessment of tactical reality. The community's intervention had created an unexpected dynamic. What had begun as a personal confrontation had evolved into a public statement about respect, service, and community values. Rex found himself facing not just a blind veteran and his service dog, but the collective judgment of an entire neighborhood. Eleanor took another step forward, her movement deliberate and unthreatening. "Put the knife away," she urged, her tone softening slightly. "You don't want this to be the mistake that defines your life." Her words seemed to reach something in Rex that previous warnings hadn't touched, perhaps because they came from a place of concern rather than authority. The morning sun had reached its full strength, eliminating any remaining shadows and illuminating the scene with unforgiving clarity. Tom Wilson had maintained his position of tactical advantage, ready to intervene if necessary. The gathered crowd of Café patrons and local business owners formed a loose semicircle, their presence both a witness to and judgment of Rex's behavior. Shadow remained the perfect image of military discipline, his body still but alert, ready to transition from passive defense to active response in a fraction of a second. Through the harness, James could feel his companion's controlled breathing, neither elevated nor stressed, simply prepared. Years of working together had created an understanding that transcended normal handler-dog relationships. The approaching sirens reached a crescendo, their wailing now unmistakably close. Red and blue lights began to reflect off the cafe's windows, creating an oscillating pattern that added to the scene's tension. Rex's companions gunned their motorcycles again, the sound carrying clear urgency. "Last chance, Rex," one of them shouted above the noise. "They're here!" The arrival of law enforcement created a pivotal moment in the confrontation outside Cooper's Café. As the first police cruiser turned onto Main Street, its sirens piercing the morning air, Rex made a decision that would transform the situation irrevocably. Perhaps driven by panic or by the wounded pride that had fueled his actions from the beginning, he suddenly lunged forward toward James's table, the knife extended in what appeared to be a threatening gesture. Shadow's response demonstrated years of military training and combat experience. The German Shepherd's movement was so precise and controlled that many observers would later struggle to describe exactly what they had witnessed. In a fraction of a second, Shadow had positioned himself between Rex and James, his previous passive stance replaced by a posture that commanded absolute authority. The transformation from service dog to military canine was instantaneous and profound. Rex froze mid-motion, the knife trembling in his outstretched hand. Shadow's warning growl carried none of the emotional aggression of a typical dog's threat display. Instead, it conveyed the professional authority of a trained military operative. Low, controlled, and absolutely serious. The sound reflected years of tactical training and real-world combat experience, a clear communication that the situation had reached its final warning stage. James remained seated, his posture reflecting complete trust in his partner's capabilities. His voice, when he spoke, carried the calm authority of a combat veteran who had faced far more dangerous situations. "Shadow is giving you one last chance to stand down," he stated matter-of-factly. "His next move will be decisive, and it won't end well for you." The warning carried no hint of threat or emotion, merely a professional assessment of tactical reality. The gathered crowd had fallen completely silent, the only sounds being the approaching sirens and the idle rumble of Rex's companions' motorcycles. Tom Wilson had moved closer, his law enforcement experience allowing him to recognize the gravity of the situation. "Drop the knife," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his former position. "You've got about 30 seconds before this becomes much worse." Eleanor Matthews, still standing her ground nearby, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of concern and resolution. Her presence, along with the other community members who had chosen to stay, created an additional layer of witness to Rex's actions. The morning sun illuminated the scene with unforgiving clarity, ensuring that every moment would be clearly visible in the numerous phone recordings being taken. Rex's companions had finally made their decision, gunning their motorcycles and peeling away from the scene, leaving their leader to face the consequences of his choices alone. The sound of their departing engines seemed to push Rex toward his breaking point, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and desperate bravado as he made his final, fatal mistake. With a sudden movement that reflected poor judgment rather than tactical thinking, Rex attempted to kick over James's table. The action never reached completion. Shadow's response was immediate and precisely measured, demonstrating the highest levels of military canine training. The German Shepherd executed a textbook defensive maneuver, intercepting Rex's movement without causing unnecessary harm. The knife clattered to the ground as Shadow's tactical intervention forced Rex off balance. The German Shepherd's control was remarkable. There was no biting, no aggressive mauling, simply a professional neutralization of an armed threat. Rex found himself on the ground, effectively pinned by Shadow's authoritative presence rather than physical force. The dog maintained his position with military precision, ensuring compliance while awaiting further commands. The first police officers arrived at this exact moment, their cruisers pulling up to the scene with lights flashing. They emerged with weapons drawn, responding to reports of an armed confrontation. The sight that greeted them spoke volumes. A man on the ground, a knife several feet away, and a German Shepherd maintaining perfect tactical control of the situation without excessive force. James's voice cut through the chaos with military clarity. "Shadow, hold." The command was unnecessary. The German Shepherd hadn't moved a muscle, but it demonstrated to the arriving officers that the situation was under professional control. Shadow maintained his position, his bearing reflecting years of military discipline and training. The gathering crowd had begun to applaud, their response a mixture of relief and appreciation for the controlled resolution. Sarah emerged from the café once again, this time carrying Shadow's water bowl, her hands shaking slightly, but her face showing clear admiration for the dog's professional handling of the situation. The morning sun continued its climb, casting shorter shadows across the scene as the police began to take control of the situation. Tom Wilson approached the officers, his former law enforcement status allowing him to provide a professional assessment of what had transpired. The phones that had recorded the incident were already being offered as evidence, their footage providing clear documentation of Rex's escalating behavior and Shadow's measured response. The community's intervention and witness would ensure that the legal consequences of Rex's actions would be fully understood and addressed. The resolution of the confrontation outside Cooper's Café initiated a carefully orchestrated sequence of professional responses. Law enforcement officers secured the scene with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter while emergency response protocols took effect. Rex, still on the ground under Shadow's watchful presence, had transitioned from defiant aggressor to compliant subject, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his consciousness. Officer Rachel Martinez, the first responder on scene, approached with tactical awareness, her movements deliberate and professional. "Sir," she addressed James, recognizing the military bearing in both handler and dog, "we'll need to take your statement, but first, would you like to recall your dog?" Her voice carried the respect of someone who understood she was addressing a fellow professional. James nodded, his composure unchanged from the beginning of the incident. "Shadow, return," he commanded quietly. The German Shepherd's response demonstrated the highest levels of military training, a precise, controlled withdrawal that maintained tactical awareness while returning to his handler's side. The gathered crowd murmured in appreciation of the dog's discipline and precision. Officer Martinez's partner, Detective Samuel Chen, began collecting witness statements from the assembled crowd. Eleanor Matthews stepped forward first, her account detailed and precise. "The young man was deliberately provocative," she explained, her teacher's habits showing in her organized narrative. "He escalated the situation despite multiple warnings, and that brave dog showed remarkable restraint throughout the entire incident." Marcus Cooper, the cafe owner, provided security. Camera footage to supplement the numerous cell phone recordings. "I've got clear views of the entire sequence," he informed Detective Chen, his Vietnam veteran's experience evident in his professional handling of the evidence. "You can see the suspect's escalating behavior and the precise moment he chose to advance with the weapon." The morning sun had reached its zenith, casting no shadows as the scene continued to unfold. Sarah approached James's table with a fresh cup of coffee, her hands now steady as the tension dissipated. "This one's on the house," she said, placing it carefully within reach, "though I think you might need to find a new morning routine for a while." Her attempt at lightness carried an undertone of genuine concern. Tom Wilson provided his own statement, his law enforcement background lending additional weight to his observations. "The dog's response was textbook," he explained to Officer Martinez. "Minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. I've worked with K9 units, and I've never seen such precise threat management. That's military training at its finest." James remained seated throughout the process, his military training evident in how he managed the aftermath of the confrontation. Shadow had resumed his service dog position, though his attention remained professionally divided between his handler and the ongoing police activity. The German Shepherd's transition between roles, from tactical response back to service animal, demonstrated the sophisticated training that set military canines apart. Detective Chen approached James with professional courtesy. "Sir, we'll need a formal statement, but I want you to know that the preliminary evidence clearly supports your position. Multiple witnesses, video recordings, and security footage all confirm that you and your dog showed remarkable restraint in the face of escalating threats." His words carried the weight of legal authority. The community's response continued to evolve as the immediate crisis passed. Local business owners emerged from their shops, offering support and solidarity. Thomas Chen from the hardware store brought out a fresh water bowl for Shadow, while Eleanor Matthews organized the other witnesses to ensure their contact information was properly recorded for follow-up statements. Rex, now in custody, had fallen into a stunned silence as officers processed him. The knife had been secured as evidence, its presence now a stark reminder of how quickly poor decisions can escalate to serious legal consequences. His abandoned companions were quickly identified through their motorcycle registrations, ensuring they would also face questioning about their role in the incident. Sarah, watching the police process the scene, turned to James with quiet admiration. "You know, we always knew Shadow was special, but I don't think any of us realized just how professional he is, the way he handled that situation." She paused, searching for words. It was like watching years of training come together in a few seconds. Officer Martinez completed her initial report, approaching James one final time. "Sir, we'll need you to come to the station later. Today for a formal statement, but I want to commend both you and your dog for how you handled this situation. Your military training probably prevented this from becoming a much more serious incident." Her professional assessment reflected the growing consensus among law enforcement personnel on scene. As the immediate crisis subsided and the police began clearing the scene, a subtle but significant shift occurred in the atmosphere around Cooper's Café. The morning's events had transformed the quiet coffee shop into the epicenter of community discussion, with news spreading rapidly through the small town of Millbrook. Shadow, ever vigilant despite the reduced tension, detected a change in the environmental dynamics that his years of military training had taught him to notice. James sat quietly at his table, his coffee now cold and untouched, as Detective Chen finished collecting his official statement. The veteran's military experience had taught him that the aftermath of any confrontation often carried its own set of challenges. Through the harness, he could feel Shadow's continued alertness, the German Shepherd's training keeping him attuned to potential secondary threats, a habit formed during their tours in Afghanistan, where follow-up attacks were common. "The local news has already picked up the story," Sarah informed them, her phone displaying multiple social media notifications. "Someone's video is going viral." The digital spread of information added another layer of complexity to the situation, one that James had hoped to avoid. His preference for quiet anonymity, cultivated since returning from active duty, was about to be challenged in ways he hadn't anticipated. Tom Wilson, who had remained on scene to provide additional support, approached with careful consideration. "You might want to consider staying somewhere else tonight," he suggested, his law enforcement experience evident in his assessment. Rex's friends who fled the scene. They're known troublemakers in the county. They might take this personally. The warning carried the weight of professional concern rather than unnecessary alarm. Shadow's ears pricked forward at the mention of potential threats, his military training automatically engaging threat assessment protocols. James reached down to touch the dog's neck, feeling the subtle tension in his companion's muscles. "We've handled worse," he replied quietly, though his hand remained near Shadow's harness, a habit formed through countless combat patrols. Eleanor Matthews, who had finally settled back at her regular table, overheard the conversation and interjected with characteristic determination. "Nonsense. You'll stay with Robert and me tonight. Our guest room is always ready, and we have a fenced backyard." Her offer reflected the community's growing protective instinct toward the veteran and his dog, though James's expression suggested discomfort with accepting civilian assistance. Marcus Cooper emerged from his café, having finished speaking with his insurance company about the morning's incident. "The veterans group is already organizing a response," he informed James, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood both military and civilian perspectives. "We're setting up a neighborhood watch rotation. None of us want any escalation from Rex's associates." The sun had begun its afternoon descent, casting long shadows across the cafe patio that Shadow tracked with professional attention. German Shepherd's military training had included operations during all light conditions, and his situational awareness remained sharp despite the hours that had passed since the confrontation. James could sense his companion's continued vigilance, a reminder that their shared combat experience had created lasting protocols that transcended their current civilian status. Detective Chen returned with additional questions, his notepad filled with witness statements. "We've identified Rex's companions through their vehicle registrations," he reported professionally. "They have prior records, mostly minor offenses, but there's a pattern of escalating behavior. We're taking this situation very seriously." The information confirmed Tom Wilson's concerns about potential retaliation. Sarah, who had been monitoring local social media reactions, approached with fresh coffee. "The community's response is overwhelming," she reported, her voice mixing concern with pride. "Everyone's sharing the video, praising Shadow's restraint and professionalism, but there are also some comments from people who seem sympathetic to Rex's side." The digital dimension added an unpredictable element to the situation's aftermath. James processed this information with military precision, his mind automatically conducting threat assessment as Shadow had taught him during their service together. The dog's training had often emphasized the importance of understanding the full tactical situation, not just the immediate threat. Now, in civilian life, those same principles applied to navigating the complex social and security implications of the morning's confrontation. The cafe's regular afternoon customers began arriving, their curious glances and whispered conversations creating a new kind of tension. Shadow's posture adjusted subtly, maintaining optimal coverage of his handler, while accounting for the changing crowd dynamics. His military training had prepared him for extended operations, and his current mission of protecting James required the same level of professional dedication. The afternoon sun cast lengthening shadows across Millbrook's main street as James and Shadow finally prepared to leave Cooper's Café. The day's events had transformed their usual peaceful walk home into something that required tactical consideration. Shadow's military training automatically engaged as they stepped onto the sidewalk, his attention divided between immediate surroundings and potential approach vectors, habits formed during countless combat patrols in Afghanistan. Detective Jen had assigned Officer Martinez to follow them home at a discreet distance, her patrol car moving slowly behind them. The police presence wasn't just precautionary. Intelligence gathered from local law enforcement suggested that Rex's associates had a history of retaliation. James could feel Shadow's heightened awareness through the harness, the German Shepherd's muscles tense with professional readiness. Rather than anxiety, "The neighborhood watch is already in place," Tom Wilson informed them, falling into step beside them with the natural ease of someone used to providing tactical support. "Veterans from the local VFW have organized rotating patrols. We've got eyes on every corner between here and your apartment." The community's response reflected both concern and determination, though James's expression suggested discomfort with requiring civilian protection. As they walked, Shadow's ears tracked multiple sounds, approaching vehicles, distant motorcycles, the normal afternoon bustle of the small town. Each noise was categorized and assessed according to his military training, potential threats, separated from routine activity. James, attuned to his companion's reactions through years of partnership, read these subtle cues like a tactical report. They passed Thomas Chen's hardware store, where the owner was installing additional security cameras. "These will cover the whole street," he called out, his gesture encompassing the approach to James's apartment building. "High definition, night vision capable. No one's going to catch us unprepared." The community's protective response was transforming the quiet town into something approaching a secured zone. Eleanor Matthews had insisted on having her son, Robert, a former Army Ranger, park his truck within view of James's apartment. The vehicle's presence served multiple purposes, both as a visible deterrent and as a quick response asset if needed. Shadow noted its position as they passed, his tactical assessment automatically incorporating new defensive elements into his security calculations. Approaching their apartment building, James detected a subtle change in Shadow's posture. The German Shepherd's muscles coiled slightly, his head lifting in a way that signaled heightened alert. Years of combat experience had taught James to trust these warnings implicitly. "Something's different," he murmured to Tom, who immediately stepped closer, his own law enforcement instincts engaging. Officer Martinez pulled her patrol car to a stop, emerging with professional caution. Shadow's attention had fixed on the building's side alley, his training allowing him to maintain awareness of multiple sectors while focusing on a specific threat vector. The late afternoon shadows made visual confirmation difficult, but the German Shepherd's other senses had detected something out of place. "I'll check it out," Martinez stated, her hand resting near her weapon as she moved toward the alley. Shadow's posture suggested he had already classified the potential threat as significant enough to warrant tactical response, but not immediate aggressive action. His military training allowed for these nuanced threat assessments, a capability that set him apart from standard service dogs. The tension broke when a figure emerged from the alley, Mike Patterson, the building's maintenance man, carrying his tools. Shadow's posture relaxed fractionally, though his professional alertness remained engaged. The incident demonstrated both the dog's heightened security awareness and his disciplined response protocols. False alarms were treated as serious until, proven otherwise, a lesson learned through combat experience. "Sorry if I startled anyone," Mike apologized, noting the assembled group's obvious tension. "Just fixing the security lights. Management wants the whole building's external lighting upgraded after what happened this morning." The news had clearly spread through the town's efficient informal networks, prompting preemptive security measures. Tom Wilson conducted a quick sweep of the alley anyway, his law enforcement thoroughness matching Shadow's military precision. "All clear," he reported, "but these dark corners need to be addressed. We'll add this to the security assessment." The afternoon's events were revealing vulnerabilities that needed to be rectified, transforming the quiet residential building into something approaching a secured facility. Inside their apartment, Shadow immediately began his standard security sweep, a habit retained from their military days. James could hear his companion's methodical movement through each room, checking entries, exits, and potential access points. The routine was familiar, a tactical procedure that had served them well in combat zones and now provided comfort in civilian life. Officer Martinez remained outside, coordinating with other patrol units to establish a surveillance rotation. The community's response to the morning's confrontation had created an impromptu security network, mixing civilian volunteers with professional law enforcement in a way that reflected small-town solidarity while maintaining tactical effectiveness. As evening approached, James's apartment had become an impromptu command center for the community's security response. Detective Chen arrived with updated intelligence about Rex's associates, his unmarked car parking discreetly behind Officer Martinez's patrol vehicle. Shadow, maintaining his professional vigilance, tracked the detective's approach while continuing his systematic monitoring of the apartment's entry points. "We've located Rex's companions," Chen reported, spreading a local map across James's kitchen table. "They've been gathering at a bar just outside county lines. Our sources suggest they're not taking Rex's arrest well." The information carried implications that everyone in the room understood. Shadow's ears pivoted toward the conversation, his military training automatically engaging threat assessment protocols. Tom Wilson, drawing from his law enforcement background, studied the map with practiced attention. "They'll likely approach from these side streets," he indicated, tracing potential routes with his finger. "The layout here creates natural choke points we can monitor." The tactical analysis reflected years of professional experience, matching Shadow's own security assessments of their environment. James listened intently, his combat experience allowing him to visualize the tactical situation despite his blindness. Through the harness, he could feel Shadow's measured reactions to each mentioned location, the German Shepherd's training, enabling him to process and categorize potential threat vectors. Their shared military experience had created an understanding that transcended verbal communication. Eleanor Matthews had organized a phone tree among the neighborhood residents, transforming the civilian community into an informal intelligence network. "We've got volunteers watching every approach," she reported, her teacher's organizational skills proving invaluable. "Any suspicious activity will be reported immediately to both police and our veteran response team." Marcus Cooper arrived from the Café, carrying fresh coffee and news from the business community. "The local shops are installing additional security cameras," he informed the group. "We'll have coverage of every intersection within 3 blocks by tomorrow morning." The community's response demonstrated a level of coordination that impressed even the law enforcement professionals present. Shadow's attention shifted suddenly toward the window, his body tensing in a way that James recognized from their combat days. The room fell silent as the German Shepherd's training engaged, his senses detecting something beyond human perception. Officer Martinez moved quietly to the window, her hand near her weapon as she scanned the darkening street. "Motorcycle," she reported professionally. "Single rider, 3rd pass in the last hour." The observation confirmed Shadow's threat assessment. Someone was conducting surveillance of the area. The dog's military training had detected the pattern before it became obvious to human observers, a capability that had saved lives during their deployment. Detective Chen immediately radioed for additional patrol units, his response reflecting the seriousness with which law enforcement was treating the situation. "We'll run the plate if they come back," he stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone used to managing escalating situations. "Meanwhile, we're setting up video surveillance at key intersections." Robert Matthews, Eleanor's son, arrived with additional security equipment, motion sensors and wireless cameras that his private security firm used for high-risk installations. "We'll have a complete surveillance perimeter set up within the hour," he explained, his Army Ranger training evident in his systematic approach. Shadow observed the equipment with professional interest, his own security protocols adapting to incorporate the new assets. The evening deepened as the security measures were installed, transforming the quiet residential street into a carefully monitored zone. James could sense the change through Shadow's reactions, the German Shepherd's movements reflecting his tactical assessment of the improved defensive position. Their military training had taught them both to appreciate the value of proper preparation and surveillance. Sarah from the Café had organized a meal delivery system, ensuring that James and the security team wouldn't need to leave the building unnecessarily. "The whole town's involved now," she reported while dropping off dinner. "Everyone wants to help protect our veterans." The community's response had evolved from simple support to organized action, creating multiple layers of security and assistance. Officer Martinez coordinated with her relief team, ensuring continuous police presence without creating an obvious patrol pattern that could be tracked. "We're integrating civilian observers with our regular patrols," she explained to James. "It gives us broader coverage while maintaining professional response capabilities." The approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of community-based security operations. Shadow maintained his vigilance as the various teams worked, his military training allowing him to process multiple activities while remaining focused on his primary mission: protecting James. The German shepherd's professional demeanor impressed the law enforcement officers, who recognized in him the same dedication they brought to their own duties. Night had fully descended on Millbrook when Shadow's behavior indicated the first sign of serious concern. The German shepherd's ears snapped forward, his body tensing in a way that James immediately recognized from their combat deployments. Through years of military operations, they had developed an almost telepathic understanding of these subtle signals. This wasn't Shadow's normal alert status. This was combat-ready positioning. Detective Chen noticed the change in Shadow's demeanor and immediately radioed the patrol units. "All units, possible activity in the target area. Stand by for confirmation." His voice remained professional, but there was an underlying urgency that matched Shadow's assessment of the situation. The dog's military training had proven reliable enough that law enforcement now trusted his threat detection implicitly. The surveillance system Robert Matthews had installed began picking up movement on multiple approaches. 3 motorcycles, running dark, approaching from the north, he reported, his Army Ranger training evident in his precise communication. 2 more vehicles, sedan type, moving slowly along Parker Street. The pattern suggested coordinated activity rather than random traffic. Shadow moved to the window, his position allowing him to monitor both the street and protect James while maintaining tactical advantage. His military training enabled him to process multiple threat vectors simultaneously, a skill honed through numerous combat operations. James could feel his companion's heightened alertness through the harness, reading the subtle changes in muscle tension that conveyed detailed tactical information. Officer Martinez's voice crackled over the radio. Confirmed visual on 5 individuals dismounting vehicles behind the Wilson grocery store. They're attempting to maintain cover. The professional assessment matched Shadow's earlier warning, validating once again the value of his military training in civilian security operations. Tom Wilson had already activated the community alert system, sending predetermined signals to the volunteer observers positioned throughout the neighborhood. "We've got coverage on every approach," he reported, his law enforcement experience showing in his systematic organization. Local veterans are moving into support positions, maintaining observation only. Shadow's attention shifted suddenly to the building's rear entrance, his body language communicating immediate concern. James recognized the change instantly. This wasn't just alert status anymore. This was imminent threat detection. "Back door," he stated quietly, his military training taking over. Shadow's picking up something specific. Detective Chen immediately deployed officers to cover the rear approach, their movements careful and coordinated. The German shepherd's warning had given them precious advance notice, allowing for tactical positioning before any direct confrontation. Through the window, shadows moved against shadows as law enforcement personnel took up defensive positions. Eleanor Matthews, monitoring the phone tree communications from her position in the building's lobby, reported increased activity around the neighborhood. "Multiple residents reporting suspicious movements in the alleys," she relayed, her teachers' precision making her an excellent coordinator. "Our observers have identified at least 8 individuals who don't belong in the area." Shadow's muscles coiled tighter as the sound of approaching footsteps became audible to human ears. His military training allowed him to maintain absolute silence while communicating detailed threat assessments through subtle body language that James could read through the harness. The German shepherd's combat experience had taught him the value of stealth in tactical situations. Robert Matthews's surveillance system captured the first clear images of their visitors. Confirming Rex's known associates among the group, he reported, his military background evident in his calm assessment. They're carrying something, but the angle isn't clear enough to identify weapons. The information caused Shadow to adjust his position slightly, optimizing his defensive coverage of James. Officer Martinez coordinated with her units, establishing a containment perimeter without revealing their full presence. "We're letting them commit," she explained professionally. "Once they make their intentions clear, we can respond with appropriate force." The strategy matched Shadow's own tactical training, allow the threat to develop until response parameters were unambiguous. The tension in the apartment had reached a critical point when the first attempt at entry became audible, subtle scratching at the back door's lock. Shadow's reaction was controlled but definitive, his body shifting to full alert status while maintaining his disciplined silence. Years of military training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, where threat response needed to be both immediate and precisely measured. Detective Chen gave the signal to his teams, their movements coordinated through practiced protocols. "Hold positions," he commanded quietly. "Let them establish clear intent." The approach reflected professional law enforcement methodology, allowing the situation to develop while maintaining tactical advantage. The attempted break-in at the rear door escalated quickly as multiple threats materialized simultaneously. Shadow's military training engaged fully as he processed the complex tactical situation, movement at both the front and rear entrances, possible threats on the fire escape, and the need to maintain protective coverage of James. The German Shepherd's combat experience allowed him to prioritize these multiple threat vectors while maintaining absolute tactical control. Detective Chen's voice cut through the tension with professional clarity. "All units, execute containment protocol. Targets are attempting forced entry at multiple points." The response was immediate and coordinated, law enforcement teams moving into predetermined positions with practiced efficiency. Shadow's ears tracked each movement, his training allowing him to distinguish between friendly and hostile forces. James remained seated in his chair, his own military experience evident in his calm demeanor. Through the harness, he could read Shadow's tactical assessments like detailed mission reports. The subtle shifts in muscle tension, the minute changes in positioning that indicated threat detection and response preparation. Their shared combat experience had created a level of communication that transcended normal handler-dog relationships. "Movement on the fire escape," Robert Matthews reported from his surveillance position. His Army Ranger training reflected in his precise observations. 3 individuals, carrying what appeared to be crowbars and possibly other tools. The information caused Shadow to adjust his position slightly, accounting for the new threat vector while maintaining his primary defensive stance. Officer Martinez coordinated with her teams outside. "Be advised, suspects are now in position for a coordinated breach attempt. Stand by for command." The professional assessment matched Shadow's own tactical evaluation. The threats were positioning for simultaneous entry, a strategy that would divide defensive resources. Tom Wilson, monitoring the community response teams, reported increased activity around the building's perimeter. "Local veterans have eyes on additional suspects approaching from the North Alley," he stated, his law enforcement experience evident in his systematic communication. "They're maintaining observation only per protocol." Shadow's muscles coiled tighter as the sound of metal on metal indicated the first serious breach attempt at the rear door. His military training allowed him to maintain absolute focus while processing multiple tactical inputs, the scratching at the locks, movement on the fire escape, approaching footsteps in the hallway. Each sound was categorized and assessed. For threat level, Detective Chen gave the signal to his teams as the situation reached critical mass. "All units, prepare for intervention. Targets are now actively attempting forced entry." The command reflected the shift from observation to active response, a transition that Shadow's combat experience immediately recognized. Eleanor Matthews, still coordinating the civilian response network, reported from her position. Additional suspicious vehicles approaching from the east. Community observers confirm at least 3 more of Rex's known associates. The information added new complexity to the tactical situation, which Shadow processed and incorporated into his defensive calculations. The first loud crack at the rear door signaled the beginning of coordinated action. Shadow's response was immediate but controlled, his position shifting to optimal defensive coverage while maintaining silent threat assessment. Years of military operations had taught him the value of disciplined response. No wasted movement, no premature action. James's voice carried quiet authority as he addressed the room. Shadow's got point on internal defense. Let him coordinate with the entry teams. The statement reflected complete trust in his companion's military training and combat experience. The law enforcement personnel present nodded in acknowledgement, recognizing the value of the German Shepherd's tactical capabilities. Robert Matthews' surveillance system captured the full scope of the developing situation, confirming 12 suspects total, positioned for coordinated entry attempts at 4 points, he reported, his military precision adding crucial detail to their tactical understanding. Shadow processed this information while maintaining his alert status, his training allowing him to adapt to the expanding threat scenario. Officer Martinez's teams moved into final position, their movements carefully coordinated to maintain tactical surprise. "Ready to execute on your command," she reported to Detective Chen. The professional response reflected years of law enforcement experience, matching Shadow's own disciplined approach to threat management. The tension in the apartment reached critical levels as multiple breach attempts became audible simultaneously. Shadow's military training engaged fully, his body coiled for immediate response while maintaining precise tactical control. The German Shepherd's combat experience had prepared him for exactly this type of complex threat scenario. The coordinated breach attempts reached critical intensity as Shadow's military training registered multiple simultaneous threats. The German Shepherd's combat experience allowed him to process the complex tactical situation with professional precision. The rear door's hinges starting to give way, the fire escape window being systematically compromised, and heavy footsteps approaching in the hallway. Each threat required specific response protocols while maintaining overall defensive coverage. Detective Chen's tactical command cut through the tension. All units, prepare for simultaneous intervention. Targets are fully committed to the breach. His professional assessment matched Shadow's own tactical evaluation. The situation had reached the point where controlled response was both necessary and justified. The German Shepherd's muscles, coiled with practiced restraint, ready for immediate action. James remained centered in his chair, his military bearing unchanged as the situation escalated. Through the harness, he read Shadow's minute adjustments like tactical updates, understanding each shift in position and tension level. Their shared combat experience had created an almost supernatural level of communication, developed through countless high-stress situations in Afghanistan. "Fire escape team is making final approach," Robert Matthews reported, his Army Ranger training evident in his precise observations. 3 suspects with pry bars, 1 possibly armed with something more serious. Shadow's ears tracked the information, while his body maintained optimal defensive positioning, his military training allowing him to process multiple threat vectors simultaneously. Officer Martinez coordinated with her external teams. "Be advised, suspects at all entry points are showing clear intent. Stand by for synchronized response." The professional evaluation aligned perfectly with Shadow's threat assessment. The attackers had committed themselves beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. Tom Wilson's voice carried urgent authority as he updated from his observation post. Community veterans report additional vehicles approaching rapidly from the north, possible reinforcements for the suspects. Shadow processed this new tactical information while maintaining absolute focus on the immediate threats, his combat training enabling complex threat prioritization. The first breach point failed with a resounding crack as the rear door's frame splintered. Shadow's response was immediate, but precisely controlled, his position shifting to create optimal coverage while maintaining tactical flexibility. Years of military operations had taught him the critical importance of disciplined reaction, responding to actual threats rather than anticipated ones. James's voice cut through the chaos with commanding clarity. Shadow, defensive position 1. The command activated specific combat protocols from their shared military experience. The German Shepherd moved with fluid precision, positioning himself to counter multiple entry points while maintaining protective coverage of his handler. Robert Matthews's surveillance system captured the full tactical situation in real time. Multiple suspects now visible at all breach points. They're committed to a simultaneous entry. Shadow's training allowed him to incorporate this intelligence seamlessly into his threat response calculations, adjusting his position with microscopic precision. The fire escape window shattered inward as Detective Chen gave the final command. "All units, execute containment now." The order initiated a coordinated law enforcement response that Shadow's combat experience recognized immediately. The German Shepherd maintained his disciplined stance, ready to coordinate with friendly forces while neutralizing hostile threats. Eleanor Matthews' voice crackled over the radio from her coordination post. Confirmed police reinforcements arriving. From the east, additional community veterans moving to cut off suspect escape routes. Shadow's tactical assessment adapted to include the new friendly forces, his military training enabling real-time battlefield awareness. The hallway door burst open simultaneously with final breach attempts at other entry points. Shadow's response demonstrated years of professional training, no wasted movement, no excessive force, just precise tactical intervention. His combat experience guided every action as he coordinated seamlessly with law enforcement teams now flooding the breach points. James remained the calm center of the storm, his military training evident in his composed demeanor. Shadow maintained defensive perimeter. No, the command reflected complete trust in his companion's combat capabilities. The German Shepherd's positioning adjusted to the dynamic tactical situation while maintaining primary protective coverage. Officer Martinez's teams executed their entry with professional precision. "Police, everyone down now!" The command echoed through multiple entry points as law enforcement personnel secured each breach. Shadow's military training allowed him to distinguish friendly forces from hostile threats instantly, maintaining tactical awareness of the entire situation. The apartment erupted into controlled chaos as multiple confrontations developed simultaneously. Shadow's combat experience enabled him to process the complex tactical environment. Law enforcement officers securing suspects, additional threats being neutralized at entry points, and the continuing need to maintain protective coverage of James. The coordinated law enforcement response transformed the apartment into a model of professional crisis management. Shadow maintained his tactical position as police teams secured each breach point, his military training allowing him to integrate seamlessly with the operation while maintaining his primary mission of protecting James. The German Shepherd's combat experience showed in every calculated movement. No wasted energy, no excessive response, just precise tactical control. 6 suspects in custody at the rear entrance, Officer Martinez reported, her voice carrying professional satisfaction. Shadow's positioning prevented any penetration of the defensive perimeter. The assessment highlighted how the German Shepherd's military training had complemented law enforcement protocols, creating an effective combined response. James remained steady in his central position, reading the tactical situation through Shadow's subtle cues. Their shared combat experience allowed him to track the operation's progress through the German Shepherd's minute adjustments, each shift in muscle tension, each slight repositioning telling its own story of threat and response. Fire escape. Team neutralized, Robert Matthews confirmed from his surveillance position, his Army Ranger background evident in his systematic reporting. 3 additional suspects secured, 1 attempting to flee down the alley. Shadow's ears tracked this information while maintaining his defensive stance, his training enabling him to process multiple tactical updates simultaneously. Detective Chen coordinated the expanding operation with practiced efficiency. All units maintain containment. We have multiple suspects attempting to scatter. The professional command matched Shadow's own tactical assessment. The threat was diminishing, but not yet fully neutralized. The German Shepherd's combat experience kept him fully alert despite the shifting situation. Tom Wilson's voice carried clear authority as he updated from the street. Community veterans have blocked all escape routes. Local police units are picking up scattered suspects. Shadow processed this strategic information while maintaining his immediate tactical focus, his military training, enabling complex threat assessment at multiple levels. The apartment, which had been the focal point of the attempted breach, now served as a model of professional crisis response. Law enforcement. Teams moved with practiced precision, securing evidence while maintaining tactical awareness. Shadow's positioning continued to complement their movements, his combat experience allowing him to adapt to the evolving situation without compromising his protective duties. Surveillance confirms no additional hostile approaches, Robert Matthews reported, his military precision adding crucial clarity to the tactical picture. All identified suspect vehicles are now accounted for. Shadow's alert status remained high despite the positive reports, his training emphasizing the importance of maintained vigilance until all clear signals were confirmed. Eleanor Matthews coordinated with the civilian network from her position. Community observers report all suspicious activity has ceased. Local veterans are maintaining perimeter watch. The information added another layer of tactical awareness that Shadow processed while maintaining his defensive position, his military training enabling comprehensive situation assessment. Officer Martinez moved through the apartment with professional efficiency, documenting the scene. Multiple tools recovered, including pry bars and what appears to be crude explosives. The discovery validated Shadow's earlier threat assessment, his combat experience having detected the serious nature of the intended breach. James's voice carried quiet authority as he addressed the room. Shadow, adjust to security sweep pattern. The command activated specific protocols from their military service. The German Shepherd began a systematic check of the apartment, his movements precise and professional, ensuring no threats remained in any corner or shadow. Detective Chen observed Shadow's methodical sweep with clear appreciation. Your dog's training is impressive. He's maintaining full tactical awareness while conducting a detailed security check. The comment reflected professional recognition of the German Shepherd's military capabilities, highlighted by this real-world application. Robert Matthews' surveillance system continued to provide crucial oversight. All external areas clear. No signs of additional suspect activity in the neighborhood. Shadow incorporated this strategic information into his ongoing tactical assessment, his training enabling simultaneous processing of multiple security levels. The apartment gradually transitioned from active crisis to secure scene, though Shadow's vigilance never wavered. His military training kept him alert to any potential secondary threats, a habit formed through numerous combat operations. Each room was systematically checked and rechecked, his movements reflecting years of professional experience. Officer Martinez coordinated with her evidence teams. "We're documenting everything. This is going to make a solid case against Rex and his associates." The professional assessment was delivered while maintaining tactical awareness, matching Shadow's own approach to post-incident security. The first rays of dawn began to illuminate the aftermath of the night's events, casting long shadows across the now secure apartment. Shadow maintained his professional vigilance despite the successful resolution, his military training ensuring no detail went unchecked. The German Shepherd's combat experience had taught him that the period immediately following a crisis often carried its own unique risks. "Final count shows 12 suspects in custody," Detective Chen reported, reviewing the operation's results with professional satisfaction. "Thanks to Shadow's early warning and tactical positioning, we prevented any serious damage or injuries." The assessment highlighted how the German Shepherd's military training had proven crucial to the operation's success. James sat in his familiar chair, processing the night's events through his own combat experience. Through the harness, he could feel Shadow's continued alertness, not the high-tension readiness of active threat response, but the measured vigilance of professional security maintenance. Their shared military background had prepared them for this phase of operations just as thoroughly as the crisis itself. "Community response teams are maintaining perimeter watch," Tom Wilson updated, his law enforcement experience evident in his systematic approach. "Local veterans have established rotating surveillance shifts for the next 48 hours. Shadow's ears tracked this tactical information while his body maintained optimal positioning, his training enabling comprehensive situation awareness. Robert Matthews worked with his surveillance equipment, documenting everything for future reference. "All camera footage has been secured and backed up. We've got clear images of every suspect involved in the attempt." The professional documentation would ensure that the night's events had lasting consequences for Rex's associates. Officer Martinez coordinated with her evidence collection teams. "We're recovering tool marks, fingerprints, and trace evidence from all breach points. The case against them is solid." Shadow observed these activities while maintaining his security. Sweep pattern, his military training allowing him to integrate new personnel movements into his tactical assessment. Eleanor Matthews arrived with fresh coffee for the law enforcement teams. Her organizational skills now focused on supporting the post-incident operation. "The whole town's talking about it," she reported. "Everyone's saying how Shadow's presence prevented what could have been a serious situation." The German Shepherd's ears flicked at his name, but his professional focus never wavered. "The surveillance network performed exactly as designed," Robert Matthews noted, his Army Ranger experience showing in his analytical approach. "Shadows. Initial warning gave us the time to coordinate a full response." The comment highlighted how military training and civilian preparation had combined effectively. Detective Chen reviewed the preliminary reports with clear appreciation. "This operation will serve as a model for community law enforcement cooperation. The coordination between Shadow's tactical capabilities and our response teams was exceptional." The professional assessment validated the effectiveness of their combined approach. James reached down to touch Shadow's fur, feeling the steady alertness in his companion's muscles. "Good work, partner," he said quietly, the simple praise carrying the weight of their shared combat experience. The German Shepherd maintained his vigilant posture, but his tail offered a single professional wag of acknowledgement. Tom Wilson organized the community watch handover, ensuring continuous coverage. We've got veterans from 3 service branches volunteering for security shifts. Nobody's taking any chances until we're certain the threat is fully contained. Shadow's tactical assessment incorporated this information, his training enabling long-term security planning. The apartment showed surprisingly little damage, thanks to the coordinated response that had prevented any serious breach. Shadow conducted another systematic sweep, his military training demanding thorough verification of security status. Each room was checked with professional precision, no detail too small for his attention. The prosecutor's office is already preparing charges, Officer Martinez informed the group. With the evidence we've collected and the number of witnesses, they're looking at serious time. The legal consequences would ensure that the night's events had lasting impact on Rex's organization. Sarah arrived from Cooper's Café, bringing breakfast for the law enforcement teams. The morning crowd's already gathering, she reported. Everyone wants to know how Shadow handled the situation. The German Shepherd's professional focus remained unchanged despite the attention, his combat training emphasizing mission completion over recognition. Detective Chen began organizing the transition from active scene to monitored location. We'll maintain enhanced patrol presence in the area for the immediate future. Shadow's demonstrated that his threat assessment capabilities are a valuable asset to community security. The professional acknowledgement reflected how thoroughly the German Shepherd's military training had been validated. The morning sun climbed higher over Millbrook as the full impact of the night's events began to spread through the community. Shadow maintained his professional vigilance as various town officials and community leaders arrived to assess the situation, his military training allowing him to process the increased activity while maintaining security protocols. The German Shepherd's combat experience had taught him that public attention could sometimes mask ongoing tactical concerns. The mayor's office has issued a formal statement praising the coordination between law enforcement and community resources. Detective Chen reported, reviewing updates on his phone. They're specifically commending Shadow's role in preventing what could have been a serious incident. The German Shepherd's ears tracked the conversation while his body maintained optimal defensive positioning, years of training ensuring no detail escaped his attention. James sat quietly, processing the growing community response through his other enhanced senses. Through the harness, he could feel Shadow's continued professional focus, the German Shepherd maintaining tactical awareness despite the changing situation. Their shared military experience had taught them both that public acclaim shouldn't distract from ongoing security responsibilities. Local news crews are requesting interviews, Tom Wilson informed the group, his law enforcement background evident in his cautious approach. They're particularly interested in Shadow's military background and how it played into last night's events. The German Shepherd's posture remained unchanged, his training emphasizing mission focus over public recognition. Robert Matthews continued, monitoring his surveillance network, ensuring ongoing security. We're seeing increased social media activity about the incident. The community's response has been overwhelmingly supportive of our veterans. Shadow processed this information while maintaining his systematic security checks, his military training allowing him to adapt to evolving situations. Officer Martinez coordinated with her patrol teams as they managed the growing public interest. We're maintaining a security perimeter to keep media at a professional distance. Shadow's tactical space won't be compromised. The German Shepherd's ears registered approval of this approach, his combat experience highlighting the importance of maintained defensive positions. Eleanor Matthews arrived with updates from the community network she had organized. The local veterans groups are organizing a formal recognition ceremony. They want to acknowledge how Shadow's military training benefited the entire town. The German Shepherd's professional focus remained unchanged, though his tail offered a slight wag at James's responding touch. The surveillance footage is being reviewed by law enforcement training divisions, Robert Matthews noted, his Army Ranger experience adding weight to his assessment. They're saying Shadow's tactical response could serve as a model for K-9 unit coordination with civilian law enforcement. The professional recognition validated the effectiveness of military training in civilian security operations. Detective Chen discussed the broader implications with his superiors. This incident is reshaping how we think about community security resources. The integration of military-trained service dogs into civilian protection protocols could set new standards. Shadow's ears tracked this conversation while his body maintained alert status, his training enabling complex tactical awareness. James received numerous messages of support from fellow veterans, each understanding the unique bond between handler and military K-9. Shadow's actions are reminding people that service dogs aren't just pets or tools, they're trained professionals with valuable skills. The German Shepherd pressed slightly closer at these words, their shared combat experience having forged an unbreakable partnership. Tom Wilson organized community response teams for ongoing security. Local businesses are implementing new security protocols based on last night's events. They're taking Shadow's warning signs seriously. The German Shepherd's tactical assessment incorporated this information, his military training enabling comprehensive security planning. The apartment had become a focal point for discussions about community safety and veteran integration. Shadow conducted regular security sweeps between official visits, his professional thoroughness unchanged by public attention. Each room was checked with military precision, maintaining tactical awareness despite the changing situation. The prosecutor's office is treating this as a landmark case, Officer Martinez reported to the group. They're emphasizing how Shadow's military training provided crucial early warning and tactical advantage. The legal recognition reflected the growing appreciation for professional K-9 capabilities in civilian security. Sarah coordinated with Cooper's Café staff to provide support for the ongoing security operation. The whole town's talking about Shadow's protection of the community. It's changing how people think about our veteran residents. The German Shepherd's professional focus remained steady, his combat training emphasizing mission completion over public recognition. Detective Chen began preparations for formal debriefing sessions. We need to document every aspect of Shadow's tactical response. His military training protocols could improve civilian K-9 unit effectiveness. The professional analysis demonstrated how thoroughly the German Shepherd's combat experience had influenced security operations. The afternoon brought new developments as Millbrook began implementing permanent changes inspired by the previous night's events. Shadow maintained his professional vigilance while city officials met with law enforcement to discuss enhanced security protocols, his military training allowing him to monitor the increasing activity while maintaining tactical awareness. The German Shepherd's combat experience had taught him that organizational changes often created new security considerations. The City Council has approved emergency funding for a comprehensive security network, Detective Chen announced, reviewing the latest updates. They're using Shadow's tactical response as a model for integrating veteran expertise into community protection. The German Shepherd's ears tracked this information while his body maintained optimal positioning, years of training ensuring complete situational awareness. James listened intently to the discussions, his military experience helping him evaluate the proposed changes. Through the harness, he felt Shadow's continued professional focus, the German Shepherd systematically assessing each new person entering their space. Their shared combat background had created an understanding of how institutional changes could affect ground-level operations. Veterans groups from neighboring communities are requesting consultation, Tom Wilson reported, his law enforcement background adding weight to the development. They want to implement similar programs, combining military K-9 experience with civilian security. Shadow processed this strategic information while maintaining his tactical focus, his training enabling multi-level situation assessment. Robert Matthews worked with city planners, expanding his surveillance network. We're designing a permanent security infrastructure based on last night's successful operation. Shadow's early warning capabilities showed us what's possible. The German Shepherd's professional attention remained unchanged, though his tactical positioning adjusted to account for the increased planning activity. Officer Martinez coordinated with her department's training division. We're developing new protocols for cooperation between service dogs and law enforcement. Shadow's military background is proving invaluable to the program. The recognition of professional capabilities matched the German Shepherd's own tactical assessment of integrated operations. Eleanor Matthews arrived with news from the community, organization she now formally headed. The town's establishing a permanent veteran integration program. They want to utilize military experience for community benefit, just like Shadow demonstrated. The German Shepherd's ears registered the information while maintaining security protocols, his combat training emphasizing continued vigilance. Security companies are studying the surveillance footage, Robert Matthews noted, his Army Ranger experience informing his analysis. They're particularly interested in how Shadow's military training enhanced the effectiveness of civilian security measures. The professional validation reflected the growing appreciation for specialized K-9 capabilities. Detective Chen discussed implementation plans with city officials. We're looking at creating a dedicated unit for coordinating veteran resources with law enforcement. Shadow's performance showed the value of military expertise in civilian protection. The German Shepherd's tactical awareness incorporated these organizational changes, his training enabling adaptive security planning. James received requests from military K-9 training facilities, each interested in studying Shadow's successful integration of combat experience with civilian service. They want to understand how military dogs can transition while maintaining their tactical capabilities. The German Shepherd pressed closer at these words, their shared combat experience having demonstrated the effectiveness of sustained training. Tom Wilson organized permanent community watch protocols. Local businesses are investing in advanced security systems based on Shadow's tactical model. They're creating a town-wide network of trained observers. The German Shepherd's professional assessment included these strategic changes, his military background enabling comprehensive security evaluation. The apartment, while remaining their personal space, had become a model for integrated security planning. Shadow conducted his regular sweeps with unchanged precision, his combat training ensuring consistent tactical awareness. Each security check maintained military standards, regardless of the evolving situation around them. The legal system is establishing new precedents, Officer Martinez informed the group. Shadow's response is being cited in cases involving service animal protection and veteran rights. The professional recognition demonstrated the broader impact of military K-9 capabilities in civilian contexts. Sarah coordinated with a newly formed business association. We're implementing standardized security protocols across all local establishments. Shadow's warning signs are being incorporated into staff training. The German Shepherd's tactical focus remained steady, his combat experience emphasizing sustained operational readiness. Detective Chen reviewed proposals for permanent changes. The department's creating specialized training programs based on Shadow's tactical model. His military protocols are revolutionizing our approach to community security. The professional analysis showed how thoroughly the German Shepherd's combat experience had influenced civilian protection strategies. 1 week after the incident, at James's apartment, Millbrook had undergone a remarkable transformation. Shadow maintained his professional vigilance as he guided James through the changed landscape of their morning routine, his military training allowing him to assess the new security measures being implemented throughout the town. The German Shepherd's combat experience helped him evaluate the effectiveness of each addition to community protection. The final security installations are being completed today, Detective Chen reported during their morning briefing at Cooper's Café. Every enhancement was inspired by Shadow's tactical response last week. The German Shepherd's ears tracked this information while maintaining optimal awareness of their surroundings, years of training ensuring no detail escaped his attention. James noticed the changes through the subtle cues in Shadow's behavior. Through the harness, he felt his companion's measured assessment of each new security feature, the German Shepherd incorporating them into his tactical awareness while maintaining his primary protective duties. Their shared military experience had taught them to adapt to evolving situations while preserving core mission focus. Veterans from 3 neighboring counties are here for training, Tom Wilson announced, his law enforcement background evident in his coordination efforts. They're learning how to integrate military K9 protocols with civilian security operations. Shadow processed this strategic information while conducting his regular security sweep, his training enabling simultaneous task management. Robert Matthews supervised the expansion of his surveillance network. We've created a comprehensive security grid based on Shadow's tactical model. Early warning capabilities have been enhanced throughout the downtown area. The German Shepherd's professional attention remained steady, though his positioning subtly adjusted to account for the new systems. Officer Martinez shared updates from the police department. K9 units across the state are adopting training protocols inspired by Shadow's performance. His military background is reshaping how we approach community protection. The recognition of professional capabilities aligned with the German Shepherd's own tactical standards. Eleanor Matthews arrived with news about the community's veteran integration program. We're establishing a permanent training center for service dogs and their handlers. Shadow's example showed us the value of maintaining military-grade capabilities. The German Shepherd's ears registered this information, while his body maintained alert status, his combat training emphasizing sustained readiness. Security consultants have finished their analysis, Robert Matthews noted, his Army Ranger. Experience informing his evaluation. They're particularly impressed by how Shadow's military training enhanced civilian protection without creating an atmosphere of tension. The professional validation reflected the successful balance of tactical effectiveness with community comfort. Detective Chen discussed long-term planning with city officials. We're implementing permanent protocols for coordination between veteran resources and law enforcement. Shadow's performance established a new standard for integrated security operations. The German Shepherd's tactical awareness incorporated these organizational changes, his training enabling adaptive response planning. James received regular updates about the impact of their experience on national veteran support programs. Shadow's successful integration of military training with civilian service is becoming a model for K9 units nationwide. The German Shepherd pressed closer at these words, their shared combat experience having demonstrated the lasting value of professional training. Tom Wilson coordinated the expanded Community Watch program, Local businesses have fully embraced the new security protocols. They're seeing the value of professional vigilance combined with community awareness. Shadow's tactical assessment included these strategic developments, his military background enabling comprehensive security evaluation. The apartment building, now a model for integrated security design, demonstrated how professional protection could enhance rather than disrupt daily life. Shadow conducted his security checks with unchanged precision, his combat training ensuring consistent tactical awareness. Each sweep maintained military standards while adapting to the improved security environment. The legal framework is evolving, Officer Martinez informed the group. Shadow's response has influenced policies regarding service animals and veteran rights across multiple jurisdictions. The professional recognition showed how military canine capabilities could positively impact civilian legal structures. Sarah managed Cooper's Café's enhanced security protocols. Every business in town has adopted standardized safety measures. Shadow's warning signs have become part of basic staff training throughout the region. The German Shepherd's tactical focus remained steady, his combat experience emphasizing sustained operational readiness. Detective Chen reviewed the broader impact of their experience. What happened here is changing how communities approach security integration. Shadow's military protocols have shown how professional protection can strengthen rather than divide neighborhoods. The analysis demonstrated how thoroughly the German Shepherd's combat experience had influenced civilian protection strategies. 1 month after the incident that transformed Millbrook, James and Shadow returned to their regular table outside Cooper's Café. The morning sun cast familiar shadows across the renovated patio, but everything else had subtly changed. Shadow maintained his professional vigilance as always, his military training now complemented by the enhanced security measures that had become standard throughout the town. The German Shepherd's combat experience had become a cornerstone of the community's new approach to protection. Final report from the prosecutor's office, Detective Chen shared, joining them at their table. Rex and his associates accepted plea deals. They'll be serving significant time. Shadow's ears tracked this information, while his body maintained optimal defensive positioning, years of training ensuring complete situational awareness, even in moments of closure. James absorbed the news quietly, his military experience helping him appreciate the full impact of their ordeal. Through the harness, he felt Shadow's continued professional focus, the German Shepherd maintaining tactical awareness while adapting to their community's new normal. Their shared combat background had shown them how single incidents could catalyze lasting change. The Veteran Integration Program is officially launching next week, Tom Wilson reported, his law enforcement background evident in his satisfaction with the security protocols. We've got canine handlers from 4 states coming to learn the Shadow protocol. The German Shepherd's posture remained professional at the mention of his name, his training emphasizing mission focus over recognition. Robert Matthews had completed the installation of the town's permanent security network. Every system is designed to complement professional canine capabilities. Shadow showed us how to balance security with community life. The German Shepherd's tactical assessment included these environmental improvements while maintaining his core protective duties. Officer Martinez shared updates from the police academy. We've completely revised our canine training program. Your military experience changed how we think about service animal capabilities. Shadow's ears registered the professional recognition while his body maintained alert status, his combat training ensuring sustained operational readiness. Eleanor Matthews approached with the morning paper, featuring a story about Millbrook's transformation. You two have changed how people see veteran service dogs. They're not just companions anymore. They're recognized professionals. The German Shepherd's tactical focus remained steady, though his tail offered a slight acknowledgement of James's responding touch. Security consultants are still studying the incident footage, Robert Matthews noted, his Army Ranger experience adding weight to his assessment. They're saying Shadow's response was a perfect example of military training enhancing civilian protection. The professional validation reflected how thoroughly the German Shepherd's combat experience had influenced security doctrine. Detective Chen discussed the broader impact with evident satisfaction. What happened here has started a national conversation about integrating veteran resources into community security. Shadow's shown everyone the value of maintaining professional capabilities. The German Shepherd's tactical awareness incorporated this strategic context while preserving his immediate protective focus. James received regular messages from veteran organizations across the country, each seeking to understand how military K9 units could better transition to civilian service. "You've created a new model, boy," he murmured to Shadow. "You showed them that combat training doesn't end with service, it evolves." The German Shepherd pressed closer, their shared military experience having proven its lasting value. Tom Wilson organized community events with new confidence. "Every business owner in town sleeps better knowing we've got professional protection protocols in place. Shadow taught us all what real security looks like." The German Shepherd's tactical assessment included these community developments while maintaining his disciplined awareness. Their morning routine, though superficially similar, now carried deeper meaning for the entire town. Shadow conducted his regular security sweeps with unchanged precision, his combat training ensuring consistent professional standards. Each check maintained military thoroughness while acknowledging the improved security environment they'd helped create. "The legal precedents are spreading," Officer Martinez informed them. "Courts across the country are citing the Shadow incident in cases involving service animal rights and veteran protection." The professional recognition demonstrated how military K9 capabilities could positively impact civilian legal frameworks. Sarah served their regular order with practiced ease. "You know, it's not just about security anymore. You've shown everyone what it means to be part of a community that takes care of its own." Shadow's professional focus remained steady, though his eyes tracked each regular customer with protective familiarity. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across their familiar space, James reflected on how one moment of confrontation had sparked such profound change. Through Shadow's harness, he felt the same disciplined alertness that had served them in combat, now adapted to protect not just one handler, but an entire community. The German Shepherd maintained his tactical awareness, his military training, now serving a broader mission of community protection and veteran integration. Their story, one of professional dedication, tactical excellence, and the unbreakable bond between a warrior and his K9 partner, had become something larger than themselves. It had shown a path forward for veterans and their service dogs, demonstrating how military training could evolve to meet civilian needs without losing its essential character. Shadow's legacy would live on in every K9 unit that followed his example, in every community that learned to value its veterans' capabilities, and in every handler who understood that professional training never truly ends. It simply finds new ways to serve. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.